tax on banks is the social credit introduced. At the same time, we've identified, and it's all costed in the budget, I've gone through it very carefully. I'm a businessman. I know that we have to look at the numbers very carefully, and I have. And we have reallocated various items of spending, and in the end, the budget that's proposed by the BC NDP is exactly the real deficit which is being presented by the BC Liberals. But the BC Liberals are pretending they don't have a budget deficit, because what they've done is they're selling off assets and balancing the budget. They're basically selling the silverware to pay the visa bill.
That's right.
Brian, do you think BC Liquor Board markup of alcohol by 100% plus GST is fair for consumers?
Do I look stupid? BC government should not be in the liquor business. Period.
If re-elected, I suppose should be the question, will you restore funds to Capilano University so they can retain the arts cuts recently announced?
I support what Capilano University is doing. It's a world-renowned university. I would like to have those programs at the university. The board has to make tough decisions. It's like autonomy with school boards. They make the decisions as to what they're going to do with the money that is provided for them. And sometimes that makes tough decisions. I mean, obviously, we have a balanced budget, and we want to maintain our fiscal discipline. And to do that, we have to make tough decisions. And everybody in a family knows that tough decisions are sometimes required, and we have to perhaps say no to some of our children for certain things that they want. So when you're balancing the budget and wanting to make sure that you have a good fiscal economy, there are tough decisions that have to be made, and that one is Capilano University's.
I've been waiting for my friend to say that they're putting forward a balanced budget, and I just heard it. She said it out of her own mouth. She said it to you. There's going to be a balanced budget. This is a government, ladies and gentlemen, and please don't make no mistake about this. This is a government which has raised the debt, the provincial debt, since Christy Clark became premier by $11 billion, the fastest rate of growth in our province's history. If Ruth and I were accumulating debts like that, we wouldn't be boasting about fiscal rectitude. This is a government which came up with a phony balanced budget which relies on asset sales, selling off what's ours in order to pay for operating costs. There's absolutely nothing righteous about the BC's Liberals' fiscal record, and it's time to stop it, and the BC NDP will begin to move us towards a balanced budget. There are many NDP governments across Canada that does so, and my commitment is that we will work in that direction.
James using the yellow card.
Never run out of yellow cards.
Hopefully I don't run out of yellow cards.
Let's just set the record straight. The BC Liberal government has proposed a balanced budget. Obviously, when September comes, that's when we're going to find out for sure. But the fact is that we have proposed a balanced budget, which is different than what the NDP has done. The fact is, if you look back at the 90s, there was no balanced budget. They missed 9 out of 10 of their spending targets. They had 6 consecutive downgrades. We were a have-not province in the 90s. And the debt was double between 91 and 2001. There was the second highest small business tax, $2 billion in new taxes, and again, last in job growth. What I'm worried about is what I hear at the doorsteps these days. And what I hear is people are worried that if the NDP gets in, there will be a mass job exodus plan for Alberta.
I'm actually going to bring this discussion back to Capilano University. I just want to remind everyone Liberals cut post-secondary education funding by $46 million in the last budget. The Liberals are proposing a new $100 million needs-based scholarship fund, but I think that's throwing money in the wrong direction. Right now, Capilano University gets $6,900 per full-time art student. Emily Carr gets $9,200. The government is disadvantaging our local university at the expense of others. A quote from a student who sent me an email. She said, "The textile arts program changed my life course for the better in so many ways. I never knew the meaning of hard work until I entered the program. That program is now gone."
This question goes to Jaime, and I'm not sure that anybody else can answer it. If elected, what do you anticipate will be the disadvantages and challenges of being an independent candidate?
Thank you. For the past 7 years, I worked for the United Nations, and I was a United Nations staff member amidst 192 countries that were negotiating international environmental policy. I was the ultimate independent. And what it meant was that I had to work harder. I didn't have a team behind me telling me what international policy was good and bad. I needed to look at the facts and figures myself. I needed to look at the science, and I needed to look all the way up to the case studies. I needed to look from the community level to the international level. But as an independent, I had an immense amount of influence on policy because I didn't have an agenda. If I'm an independent in the legislature, I can agree with the NDP. I can agree with the Liberals. I can agree with the Conservatives and the Greens. And because of that, I can build trust. I can speak for the people of the riding with an honest and safe voice that will be listened to once I show that I can be trusted. Thank you.
Ryan, will you support amending the 2002 Workers' Compensation Board legislation which drastically cut pension benefits and appeal rights for injured BC workers?
Yes.
This one goes to Mr. Hanson, and I will read it verbatim. How can anybody trust Adrian Dix, who forged a document to obstruct the police, took $75,000 as he left, and now flip-flops on Kinder Morgan?
Well, I know Adrian Dix, and several people in the room know him as well. And he's a man, he's a good man, and he's a good man with a good heart. He made a mistake, and it was a mistake a long time ago. I know I'm a little sensitive on the question because if in fact the tests for any of the four of us at this podium were perfection, then we would all have to run from this room screaming. We've all made mistakes. And I wouldn't want to be accountable for mistakes I made when I was as a young man, as Adrian was working for as a powerful man. He was working for the most powerful man in the province. Nonetheless, Adrian's taken responsibility. He's admitted his wrong. And since that time, I challenge anyone in the room to identify one lapse of judgment, morality, or rectitude on the part of Adrian Dix. Since that time, he has lived an impeccable life.
This is addressed to Jane. Please explain how the Pacific Carbon Trust serves the people of BC.
The whole idea of the Pacific Carbon Trust, and me not being an expert in this particular area, is to try to encourage companies and people to save their greenhouse gases. And for those companies or individuals that need to purchase the offsets, then they can purchase them from whatever. But what I wanted to just mention, because I know this has come up in another question, is school boards and municipalities, whatever carbon tax that they do have to pay is paid back in grants directly to them. So they do not suffer from carbon tax that they have to pay for.
This one is addressed to Mr. Hanson. Could you please tell us the NDP position on the Site C dam?
I'm not aware of the NDP position on the Site C dam. I mean, it obviously involves serious balancing of economic harm against economic opportunities. Speaking very personally, I see a lot of benefits in hydroelectric power because it's not nuclear and it's not fossil fuel. However, Site C is a big project. It involves serious environmental harms, and I wouldn't want to be heard to be speaking on behalf of the BCNB. It's a decision I think is going to have to be made with considerable care and considerable caution.
There are two questions here that talk about something called the Therapeutic Initiative, and I'm not sure what that is. I will just maybe ask the candidates, yes, no, if they are aware of this. Are you in favor of continuing the Therapeutic Initiative? First of all, does anybody know what it is? Okay, you took a second to tell me what it is, and then tell me.
All right. The Therapeutics Initiative is, British Columbia is world leaders in the evaluation of the therapeutic effects of drugs. And bear in mind that the pharmaceutical industry isn't always completely above board. I know this as a lawyer, having pursued class actions against them with respect to the efficacy and harms and benefits of drugs. The Therapeutics Initiative is a scientific body that evaluates these things. We're a world leader in it. It has put us on the map in terms of pharmaceutical science, and the BC Liberals, for reasons that Jaime will explain to you, have abolished it, thereby allowing the pharmaceutical industry to have one less check and balance on their protocols of efficacy.
So the question is, are you in favor of continuing the Therapeutics Initiative?
Absolutely. It's probably the best dollar spent in terms of healthcare.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure, why not?
It's one of the
Yes
checks
or
and
no?
it's one of the checks and balances that we need.
Here's a question that seems to go to all candidates. So, transitioning from child services to adult services has been in the news lately, with a family in Ontario giving up their adult child due to the lack of services. And it has finally come to national attention. What is your position to address the current crisis in services for children and adults with disabilities? And will you commit to a CLBC review? It looks like two questions, but start with Jim.
Again, this is an important issue for everyone in the room. I was in a coffee shop not too long ago, and a man well past 80 was with his mentally challenged son. And he was speaking to me, and he didn't tell me in words, but I could see it in his eyes, that his concern was that he'd soon return to the Lord, and his son would remain behind. And he didn't think that CLBC was going to look after him. He said he'd never voted NDP, but this time he was going to. Single issue voter, CLBC. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all judged by how we treat our most vulnerable. And CLBC has been a disaster. And Mr. Harry Bloy, the minister that's ran it into the ground, should pull his head in shame. Of course we'll commit to a review. And I never heard a peep either from my MLA on this important issue.
Yeah, there's two studies that I read about on this with quite interest. The first was actually a review of CLBC, looking at the individualized funding model and what a failure it's been. It's a great idea, implementation has been absolutely terrible. So urgent review of CLBC, especially the individualized funding, which I think is very important. Individualized funding allows people who are receiving support from CLBC to actually decide how they're going to spend the money, rather than the government telling them who they're going to give it to and for what. So I support that review. The other study that came out recently looked at the transition from children to adults for youth with mental illness. And there was a number of recommendations that came out of that. This report was just released last month, looking at the continuum for provision of services, looking for the appointment of a senior official to coordinate across ministries to ensure that there isn't a discontinuation. And I 100% support every single one of the recommendations that's in that report. Thank you.
BC Conservative spending smarter policy will help to free up some funds that can be redirected to that sort of thing. And it's not just disabled children. We have a whole bulge going through population right now. I'm on the tail end of baby boomers. And so the baby boomers older than me, and they're going to be putting a huge strain on our services all around. So we've got to figure out what we're going to do and make sure that there's adequate care for them too.
Jim, you have not approached my office at all. When you say accusations like you haven't heard a peep from me, well, if you had written to me, I would have responded. So, with regards to CLPC, it was recognized, actually, 2 years ago, that there was a problem within CLPC, and he's right that there was a minister that lost their job because of it. Subsequently, there was a review, and I think it's the review that Jaime was referring to, the deputy minister review, and the government did accept all of the recommendations, and it was an interministerial team that was formed, because sometimes in government you have silos in ministries, and one ministry doesn't know what the other ministry is doing. So this review made sure that all ministries were communicating with each other, so that we would ensure that when children did grow out of age, that they would be well taken care of in the CLBC system as they were children.
This comes from a gentleman named Bruce Stout, who arrived here in a battery-powered car, I think. And he was able to purchase this renewable energy-powered car because of the $5,000 rebate provided by the Smart PC. Are you in favor of retaining this grant?
Deep down, I'm saying no, but I would have to study that a little closer before I would slam the door on it. Okay?
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to respond?
Apparently not. This one goes to Mr. Hanson. There's a big preamble here, but I'm just going to read the question. If elected, what would you do to limit the amount of corporate or, for that matter, union donation to political parties and to make these donations more transparent?
Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is an important issue for our democracy. Our democracy can only be as strong as the independence of government. And if elected officials are reliant on big corporate donors, I'll give you a statistic that's fascinating. This specific Carmen Trust led to millions of dollars being paid by universities and schools and hospitals, and $13 million of it found their way into companies, and those companies gave $2.5 million to the BC Liberals. So do you think the BC Liberals are completely objective when they evaluate their policy options? Adrian Dixon, the BC NDP, has called for a ban on corporate union donations. It'll make it harder for us politicians to raise funds, but ladies and gentlemen, it'll lead to more independent and more democratic process, and I fully support it.
Mr. Wilson.
The BC Conservatives began with that initiative of banning union and corporate donations. That is part of our platform and one of the first things that we'll do. 59% of the current slate of NDP candidates have overt ties to unions or public service, government health care, education. The Liberals accept vast amounts of money from corporations. So even from just an appearance point of view, they've got to be beholden to those interests rather than yours and mine.
There's a question here for all the candidates. Is why are you drinking bottled water? A green candidate brought tackle. I brought them. They're not their fault. So this is for Jaime. What is your position with reference to reducing the number of health boards in BC, where there are 7 versus 1 in the province right next door?
There are, I think right now, so many inefficiencies in government. And the first thing that we do when I was working for the World Bank, the first thing we do when we go and we're looking to invest in a country is we look at the replication, we look at the inefficiencies, and we look at how the government can work better, how the government can work smarter. In terms of health boards, there are different needs in different areas of the province, but you don't need different boards to recognize that. If you have a well-designed system, it can take into account the needs of Indigenous peoples, the needs of people living in cities, rural populations. All you need to do is make sure that you're aware that you have these very different populations, you're aware of the different issues that they face, and you're aware that they require different solutions. The government hasn't been good at recognizing that in the past, but if BC is to continue to thrive in this economy, they have to do that going to the future. Thank you.
Mr. Hanson. Page 42 of the BC Liberal platform argues that the past 25 years of contract negotiations with the BC Teachers Federation have led to teachers' strikes. The BC Liberals suggest there has to be a better way. As a teacher in BC and parent of a 10-year-old, what do you think is the best way to reach an agreement between government and the teachers of this province?
Well, the BCNP is committed to collective bargaining. And I think the sadness here, from my point of view, it spans the whole of the Liberal government. Has been an acrimonious relationship with teachers and other workers, particularly hospital workers. But let's focus on the teachers. Their words are strident. Going right back to Christy Clark when she was the education minister, I followed it very carefully. Very inflammatory, aggressive. That isn't the way forward. We need collective bargaining, but we need to do it in the context of a cooperative approach. And this maybe runs through the whole BC Liberals as part of their philosophy. It's all contest, it's all fight. You know what we need to do is cooperate. If we cooperate, we'll come to a collective agreement through proper bargaining. That's the solution.
Jane, somebody wants to know how the carbon tax helps him.
Him?
Or her. Me. This said me. How does the carbon tax help me?
The BC Liberal government brought forward the carbon tax, actually before I was elected, in an effort to reduce greenhouse gases. It was quite successful, but we've now decided to freeze it because not all jurisdictions have caught up on the intent. And in order to remain competitive for certain industries like agriculture and cement, etc., and oil and gas and other resource industries, we decided to freeze it to wait for other jurisdictions to catch up. So I believe that answers the question.
Okay. Oh, Jamie has one card up.
I'm using my last one on climate change because it's an issue that's very close to my heart. And I think that the problem with the carbon tax, and I do support the carbon tax as it is, but the problem with the carbon tax is the BC is always talking about how BC was first with the carbon tax, and isn't that great? The problem is BC is still stuck at being first. Everyone else is moving on. They're using the carbon tax as part of a broader climate change mitigation strategy. Some of them, like if you look at Australia, they're using the carbon tax to transition to an emissions trading scheme. Costa Rica is using carbon tax as part of its payment for ecosystem services to actually increase the sequestration of carbon in its forests. The government of BC has thus far almost entirely ignored climate change adaptation. We don't have an adaptation for our ports. San Diego's developed a great adaptation plan looking at sea level rise, water conservation, beach erosion. That hasn't happened in BC. The carbon tax is step number one. Stop talking about it being first and talk about what we're going to do next. Thank you.
Moving along to Brian. What is your position on the trophy and score handling of supernatural British Columbia's wildlife, especially those hunted in BC parks?
I'm not sure I heard all of that.
What is your position on trophy and sport hunting of supernatural British Columbia's wildlife, especially those hunted in BC parks?
That's a great industry, should be encouraged. You don't like hunting? Well, I'm sorry, but it is a great industry. People are willing to pay huge amounts of dollars to come here and take advantage of it. So bring it on. I'm not a hunter myself, but I'm not going to tell somebody else they can't hunt. I would never do that.
In about 5 minutes, we are going to move to questions from the floor. You will have 15 seconds to ask your question, and it can be directed toward any candidate. So we just have a couple more questions that we're going to ask of the candidates, and then we will move to basically an open mic on the floor. To all candidates, we're just going to go down here. If you are elected, will you provide funding to construct a new sewage disposal plant, which we must have in 2020?
Well, I am in no position to make funding commitments with respect to sewage plants in 2020. The immediate crisis is to bring the fiscal balance in order. We're in a desperate slide, the fastest rate of debt growth in history under Christy Clark. We don't hear it from her mouth, but these are the facts. So we'll correct that slide, and we're going to have to look at priorities from there. And if in fact the priority weighed against all others, and there's an awful lot of needs in our society right now, there's an awful lot of things that have to be given serious attention. If it's sewage in 2020, then that's what it will be. But I can't say anything further beyond that.
When we're talking about tankers, I think we need to look at why tankers are so bad. Tankers are not the only threat to our marine environment, and that's what makes them so dangerous. They're the extra threat. I live up in Dinar, I'm in Cascades. I would love to be able to eat the mussels that grow on the beach. I would love to, but I can't. I can't because of the pollution we have up in Dinar from sewage. I think that we need to be looking at all of the priorities in order to actually ensure that we have clean water here in North Vancouver Seymour Valley, most especially. And as a first step, I think I need to take care of my own septic tank issue. And as a next step, if I'm elected as MLA, I'd look at doing that for everyone else. Yeah, thank you.
Well, secondary treatment is obviously a good thing, but there's an awful lot of things we need to do in this province. The economy is the big thing, obviously. The richer we are, the greener we can be. If you look at a third world country, they're eking out survival, they're barely living. They can't afford to be green. As we grow our economy, we're going to become even greener than we are now.
I agree with growing the economy. With regards to that specific project, I would be happy to work with the municipalities on making that project come to fruition. If, for instance, the municipalities and UBCM consider that a high priority, I actually believe that it is, and we'll work to make that happen.
I'm going to ask just a couple more questions, and then we're going to go to the floor. And I'll ask this of each question. How do you maintain your values and promises under pressure from special interest groups and big business? Mr. Hanson.
The Conservative candidate mentioned a certain number of BCNEP candidates who he said were in the dominant sway of the public sector unions. Well, I can't comment on that, but I know I'm not. When I declared my candidacy, I was amazed. People came to my side and gave me money, one after another, and I've exceeded my fundraising goals, and we'll be spending a full budget in North End Seymour here on the BCNP campaign. But these are people that want me to be in office, the people that have known for my lifetime, one after another. I don't have any dominant fundraisers that I have to turn my minds to. So perhaps we'll hear from the other candidates.
I have absolutely no concern about maintaining my values and promises under pressure from industry. It did cross my mind before I started to run. What happens if my values conflict with those of my constituents? And that was very definitely something that I discussed with myself and with my family before I decided to run, because it could happen. And we need to recognize that. I believe very strongly in my values, and I would just hope that if a situation arose where my values conflicted with that of my constituents, that I would have set in place a sufficient infrastructure to actually have an open and back and forth dialogue with constituents so that I could express my views to constituents and hopefully convince them to my point of view. So that's why it's so important to have this two-way discussion between MLAs and their constituents, so that if these value issues do arise, they can arise and be resolved through a dialogue.
I would agree with Jaime on all of that. Before I decided to jump in, I actually took out a piece of paper and I wrote down a bunch of things. And one of them was, I will not change my values. So there you go.
Well, I'm the only one here, I think, that's got elected official experience, both on school board as well as an MLA. And anybody that knows me knows that I work very, very hard on behalf of my constituents for whatever the issue is. And I take your issues personally to whatever the minister is that's involved with that particular issue and advocate. And I have been successful. I have been successful in getting funding for particular groups, seniors groups, North Shore Rescue. I have been successful in getting funding for the North Shore Girls Soccer, etc. There's a list of people that are in my endorsement brochure that you can take a look that have been very, very happy with the work that I have done on behalf of them. And I will continue to do that.
This is our final written question, and it's a yes/no. And I'll start with Mr. Hanson. The property purchase tax was brought in almost 30 years ago, and in the interim, property values in Vancouver have skyrocketed. Are you in favor of raising the tax-free exemption to make it easier for first-time home buyers to enter the market? Yes or no?
Definitely yes.
Sorry, no on this one.
I would say yes, and not just for first timers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Who among you would end the tens of millions of dollars that we give away as BC taxpayers as subsidies to wealthy corporations like Chevron, Apache, and Shell, in the form of free water, free road building, exploration grants, deferred corporate taxes, and low royalties for resources?
15 seconds out.
Well, you're against my very good point, which is sometimes the people who make the money and earn the profits aren't the ones who pay the price. It can be the commons who pay the price. All of us suffer the harm, and yet the money gets funneled into the hands of certain corporate interests, and they enjoy it. I think of this in relation to Indian Arm. I too have been up in Indian Arm all my life, and Indian Arm has been significantly changed and damaged through industrial interests. And I didn't make any of the money from that, but I'm paying the price because I don't get to enjoy the nature. These are big questions, and they're questions that need to be addressed at a very serious level. We need some bigger thinking, and I don't think you're going to get it from Christy Clark.
On this, I would actually change the subsidies. I think that BC companies need to have better incentives to actually participate in some of the global sustainability initiatives that are led by industry. An example that my colleagues sitting at the table here heard before is the Cement Sustainability Initiative. It's 24 biggest cement industries in the world who have gotten together and developed a plan for climate change mitigation, for sustainability, and they've become world leaders, and they're recognized around the world for their sustainability initiatives. I would incentivize participation of BC cement industries in this and other similar industry-led initiatives. I think if we incentivize positive growth, if we incentivize industries to develop their own solutions in collaboration with other industries around the world, we will find that we're actually able to bring in best practice examples from all over the world here to BC, where we can make them our own. Thank you.
Case-by-case basis, you can't always dump on the banks and the corporations because they are the big, big economic engines. They're what keep the place going. Thank you.
One of the proposals that is in the BC Liberal platform is to utilize the taxes and royalties from the proposed LNG development in the north to help pay for not just education and health, but also to pay down the debt. So, in contrast to your position, the BC Liberals would like to utilize the royalties from those types of resources to assist us in our education and our health and social development issues.
And there's another question from Ms. Donovan.
Yeah, this question's for Jake or really anyone else who would like to take a chance at answering this. If 50+1 card check union organizing is okay for Stephen Harper's Conservative, can you explain to me why it's not okay for the BC Liberals?
Sorry, was 50+1 card check? Is that what you referred to?
50+1 gets you organizing.
Okay, in terms of unionizing. Is this what it was, unionizing a shop?
Yeah, 50+1 union card check organizer.
Yes.
The Conservative federal government, if you get 50+1 cards signed, the organizing drive is done. There is no secret ballot vote required. So why do the Liberals say we need a secret ballot vote?
Okay. I'm not familiar with what the federal Conservatives are doing, but I do know that if people are being approached to unionize, that they should be able to make that decision on their own without being intimidated, and that's why I support the secret ballot.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Got a longer question, but I'll try to cut back on it. I'm just wondering, candidates, my family first of all going to be voting purely on environmental issues. We own an ecotourism company out of North Vancouver, so the environment means everything to us. I'm wondering how many people here tonight know that European salmon viruses from infected farmed salmon are killing our wild salmon. Candidates, if you or your party are elected, will you stop renewing salmon ocean leases to protect our wild salmon? And will you also stop the sale of infected farmed Atlantic salmon in our supermarkets?
Obviously, the protection of the wild salmon is an absolute top priority. I see my son is now with us, and you're out in a small boat, you catch a salmon with your son, that's a priceless experience. That can't be converted into money. And the thought that we have introduced environmental harms to our wild salmon that could literally annihilate something as precious and beautiful as that can't help but cause us a great deal of sadness. BCNDP supports the Commission of Inquiry right down to the curtailment of farmed salmon in certain locations if it can be established that that is actually causing harm. It's an issue we take very seriously. However, I am stopping short of saying there's going to be a ban on farmed salmon. What needs to be done is a very careful scientific oversight with the preservation of our wild species being priority number 1, not priority number 20.
I've heard the rhetoric that we need to support salmon fish farming because it contributes to our economy. North America accounts for less than 1% of global fish farming production. Of that, less than a quarter is actually coming from Canada. At the same time, Canada has about 7% of the world's renewable water. There is no reason why we should be investing in marine fish farming when the potential, if you're looking at it from a purely economic standpoint, is much greater for land-based in tank fish farming. And that's not even looking at the negative environmental impacts. Our ecotourism industries bring in far more money over the long term than fish farming. I think we need to take a serious look with the federal government at how they are allowing this to go ahead. And I think we need to start speaking up for our own environment, our own fish stocks, which are already under threat from so many other pressures. Fish farming is just one more.
I would love to see fish farming done on land in tanks, much better for the environment. We all love the environment. I've been off the west coast of the island many, many times salmon fishing, and tens of thousands of dollars come in, hundreds of thousands of dollars come in a year. People flying in there to do the very same thing, just like the hunting thing too. But yeah, fish farming is definitely something that should be looked at, and you may know that John Cummins was a commercial fisherman for a long time, so he knows a lot about this. And it is a federal issue for the most part, but I'm sure we can have some influence. Thank you.
The BC Environment Ministry has accepted every recommendation that applies to the province from the Cohen Commission, including the moratorium on any fish farms around the Broughton Archipelago. I said that correctly. And I definitely support them and will continue to support industries that are environmental stewards to the land. And I think that the more that the technology gets better with regards to the inland fish farms, I think that more will become, and we can be world leaders here in British Columbia in that. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
We are now going to go to closing comments, and I'm going to start at the other end, and we'll go this direction. So Jane, and then Brian, and Jane, and Mr. Hanson. So please welcome Jane. Did you want to come here, or do you want to do it from there?
Sure, I'll come over there.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Lorraine, for hosting us, and also to the Blue Ridge Community Association, Provincial Seymour, for organizing this meeting. And thank you to all of you for coming, and my fellow candidates. It's I know it's a rough job to organize, and I very, very much appreciate it. I'm just going to reiterate what I said at the outset. I've been your MLA for 4 years, and before that I was on the school board. I have worked my butt off for people in this riding, and I will continue to do so. Everything that I do is on behalf of my constituents, and no, I'm not beholden to anybody. So I will continue to do that. I've been to every soccer field, I've been to every senior center, I've been to every legion, I've been to every single healthcare facility as well as senior centers. And I know my constituents. My constituents have approached me, they know how to get a hold of me. I'm accessible and transparent, and I will continue to do so. Just one thing that I wanted to mention with regards to the BC Liberal budget. It is balanced, and we need to have an economy that will help to pay for all of the things that everybody's mentioned here today. Health, CLBC, education, housing, post-secondary, etc. The only way that we are going to be able to afford what everybody wants and we deserve is to have a booming economy. And that's what we're proposing with our platform. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a great night.
I'll sit here if that's okay. This on? Is it on? Yeah. Well, thank you again to all the organizers and to Lorraine Harvey for emceeing this event. And most of all to all of you for spending your evening here tonight. 12 years of Liberal rule. Debt is at an all-time high and slated to go higher along with taxes. The Liberals get their major funding from large corporations and special interest groups. This leaves them beholden, at least in appearance, to those interests, and not to you and I as taxpayers, as I mentioned before. We remember the BC rail scandal, we remember the horrid implementation of the HST, and now back to the confusing PST, which is an absolute blight for small businesses like mine. They have implemented a completely ineffectual and punitive tax grab on every single liter of gasoline purchased, the carbon tax, which, make no mistake about it, is a tax on everything. Isn't life expensive enough without that too? And we all know how badly we fared under the NDP in the 90s. Adrian Dix was part of that, with the fast cat ferries and becoming a have-not province for the first time in our history. Do we really want to go there again? Based on past performances, neither of these parties deserve your support. So what do? Where do you park your vote? Do you say the heck with it and stay home? I can't do that in good conscience, can you? Do you protest vote and support the Greens or an independent? Or do you listen to that voice inside that says, you know, I do have another choice, one that speaks to my core values and those of my neighbors, a common sense choice that is responsible and viable, a conservative choice. I'm offering you hope for a vibrant and prosperous future. The BC Conservatives believe that BC should be open for business because we believe in BC. So make the right choice. Make the right change for the better. I'm Brian Wilson. I hope for your support on May 14th. Thank you.
I've been sitting for a long time. It's nice to stand up. So I just wanted to echo Jane's thanks to everyone who organized this and who's here tonight. I just wanted to outline the 5 things that I would prioritize if I was elected as MLA. First, I would push for an independent advocate for seniors. Second, I would push for a Bill of Rights for disabled persons. I would fight to keep tankers out of Burrard Inlet. Fourth, I would cancel the Pacific Carbon Trust and replace it with something that actually works, so that industry and government can develop their own solutions to climate change with government stepping in as a last resort. And finally, and this would probably take at least 4 years, I would slowly work with other MLAs to build a proactive approach to development, so that instead of waiting for industry to tell us what they want for the future of BC, we can tell them what we expect in partnership with them for a strong and sustainable BC for our children. I urge you on May 14th to please consider voting independent. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be your MLA because I believe we can have a government with better priorities. Do we want to have $70 million in cuts at CapU, closure of whole programs, or would we rather invest in advanced education and skills training so that our British Columbians get the skills they need for the jobs of the future right here in our community? Is that what we want? Do we want 30% cuts to seniors' home care, or would we rather invest in our elderly to ensure that our most senior citizens stay in their homes and not in hospitals? Do we want the fastest rising debt in history? Or do we want a government that knows to live within its means and spend only what it has? Do we want secret memos in the Premier's office? Or do we want an open and accountable government? Do we want a doubling of raw law exports, or would we rather have the manufacturing jobs right here in British Columbia with appropriate investments in the pine beetle devastated forest so that our kids and our grandkids can continue in that industry? Do we want investment in foreign awards, or would we rather invest in our film industry to create jobs right here in our community? Ladies and gentlemen, soon we will have to choose more of the same or change, and that change can be for the better. On May the 14th, I urge you to vote. On May the 14th, I urge you to vote for better government. Thank you.